Hey yo, good evening viewers of YouTube. My name is Tyler and welcome to the channel that has decided to take a strong stance against the bad actors in this space. Well, today I am standing the tallest I have ever stood and walking harder than I have ever walked.
Walk hard, hard down life's rocky road. Walk bold, hard. That's my creed, my code.
This episode would make Dewey Cox proud. It's time for Chico Crypto. Now, I need to preface this episode with a disclaimer. All information gathered was based on due diligence research. Based on this research, the Chico Crypto channel has come to personal opinions about the figures and businesses represented in this video. I would like to thank Double T Crypto on Twitter for helping me with the research, and Corin Faith of BreakerMag.com for breaking the story on the leader of Binance's charity. Yes, this episode is about the Binance charity, the Blockchain Charity Foundation, and is the first part in a two-part series. So let's begin. The Binance charity was suddenly pushed in the public eye on October 8th, 2018, which was covered by most major news outlets like Cointelegraph. The reason this charity gained so much attention was because of the formal announcement of how the charity would be funded. Here is the official Binance announcement. As we can see, Binance would be making a change to their listing fee policy, starting immediately on October 8th, 2018. They would make all listing fees transparent, but you have to go through the charity's foundation's public wallet to find them individually. We will do that in part 2. Project teams will still propose a number they would like to provide for a listing fee, or now appropriately called a donation. Binance will not dictate a number, nor is there a minimum required listing fee. Now, why was this done? Well, let's go back to a July 2018 interview on CNBC Crypto Trader.
There have been allegations that exchanges charge exorbitant listing fees. We've heard in some cases that it's $5 million per trading pair. Does Binance charge listing fees?
So we do, but what we do is that we don't negotiate, and we don't ask for a price. The project team, when they submit the application, they tell us what they want to pay. And you can say zero, which we will accept. And we have listed coins that said zero.
But is it a case that if I tell you that I want to pay $1 million, that I have a better chance of being listed on Binance?
Actually, so there's a sweet spot of the money you pay. We actually, like, if it's too high, we actually get worried. If you want to pay us like $20 million US, it's like, who would want to pay us $20 million? Who would be that eager to list a coin? Yeah. Most likely some scam. Right, so too high is actually not too good. There's a sweet spot somewhere. Zero is okay too. We list a few coins that said zero, and because they're great projects, we list them. So it's a free market. I wouldn't say where the sweet spot is, but it's not that high. We list coins for fairly low fees.
CZ acknowledges that there are indeed listing fees, but it was more or less used as a litmus test of a project's perceived legitimacy. Now, this video isn't going to dive into the validity of the claims of reports of exorbitant listing fees allegedly asked by Binance from several project teams like Dogecoin, Decred, Digibyte, Expanse, and other coins. This clip was shown to clarify that there has always been a very vague policy when it comes to collecting listing fees from Binance. Many people believe that this is done on purpose in order to keep the line blurred on qualification and procedures when it comes to being listed on the Binance exchange. What qualifies as a worthy project is left completely arbitrary, meaning it's possible for them to change standards on the fly, leaving the doors open for off-the-record deals protected from exposure through non-disclosure agreements. And these agreements must be signed before any of the deals take place. In my opinion, based on the information I have been given, Binance uses these NDAs and their position of power to not only keep projects silent, but also based on my BlockNet video, to do things such as conduct opposition research for projects they are building, like their Binance DEX. Now, I have been given the okay to show this, but the name of the person who is contacted is blurred out. This is an email saying that BlockNet has breached their NDA, and they want BlockNet to contact me to take down my video. Well, BlockNet has allowed me to show these emails and said it's okay for me to leave the video up, and that is what I'm choosing to do. I applaud them for standing up and walking tall. Now back to the charity. Before, Binance took all the fees as a for-profit model for the Binance Exchange. But now all fees collected from listings would be diverted to their in-house charity. Now, why was this done? For the greater good of the world, or to diffuse the criticism of being a pay-to-play exchange model, despite not having a clear policy on collecting these funds in the first place? Well, let's investigate. The Binance charity was announced before October 2018. All of this was just showing their listing fees would be donated to this charity. In September of 2018, it was found out the charity would be headed by Helen Hai. Here is a Forbes announcement article, and as we can see from this picture from the Delta Summit, she is the United Nations Industrial Development Organization Goodwill Ambassador for Industrialization in Africa. And yes, she is heading the 100 million Binance Blockchain Charity Foundation. She is also an influencer at the World Economic Forum, recognized global visionary by the UBS, and member of the board of advisors at the Norwegian African Business Association. Very impressive resume, and since Binance and the charity is located in Malta, one of the largest money laundering hubs in the world, you would need someone with these credentials to lead it. You would need someone like Helen Hai, especially with the charity's chairman of its senior advisory board being Malta's president, Marie-Louise. But let's examine Helen's resume a little more closely, and you'll find out her previous position as the CEO of Overseas Development for Huijian Group, a shoe manufacturer headquartered in Dongguan, China. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Corin Faith of BreakerMag.com went deep into the history of Huijian Group and Helen's role into their expansion of operating their factories in Africa. The article is in the description if you would like to check it out. Helen presided over the Huijian factories in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia from 2012 to 2013. CNN did a special report on the new factory and their efforts of industrialization in the region to provide jobs for just 600 people.
This is my shoe factory in Ethiopia. We produce 2,000 pairs of shoes every day.
Helen was in charge of operations. She made a military-like environment to enforce discipline among workers. The workers were marched to and from their shifts, dressed in matching suits. This was meant to foster an environment of teamwork and unity, much like the military. No questions, no thinking for yourself, just work. In 2012, a French media outlet reported on the factories, and we will watch the report now with a rough translation of what they are saying.
Grande comme 2 fois la France, compte 91 millions d'habitants. Dans les faubourgs de la capitale Addis Abeba, envoyés spéciaux Gérard Grisbeck, Frédéric Ranck.
Ici, il n'y a pas de temps mort. Et gare à ceux qui l'auraient oublié. Plus vite, plus vite! On l'aura compris, lui est chargé de dynamiser toute la chaîne de montage. Wagen, un des géants chinois de la chaussure implanté ici depuis moins d'1 an et qui emploie déjà 600 ouvriers éthiopiens, le double d'ici la fin de l'année. Les contremaîtres sont tous chinois, le moindre faux pas est bruyamment rectifié.
Non, ça suffit maintenant. Ici, ici.
Le cuir est découpé, la matière transformée, teinture, collage, réglage. Les machines, elles, viennent toutes de Chine.
C'est un bon travail, parce que je suis jeune et je n'avais pas de boulot. C'est une chance pour moi d'être ici.
Une chance aussi pour l'entreprise chinoise, qui produit pas moins de 2000 paires de chaussures par jour pour de grandes marques. Toutes ces marchandises partiront directement vers l'Europe et les États-Unis. Autre chance pour l'entreprise, en Éthiopie, les salaires sont particulièrement bas.
Je gagne 40 € par mois. Ça peut aller jusqu'à 42 avec les heures sup.
On comprend maintenant pourquoi l'usine a décidé de quitter la Chine. Là-bas, pour le même travail, elle doit payer 10 fois plus ses employés. Et même si la productivité est moindre, presque moitié moindre, délocaliser est une aubaine pour les entreprises chinoises. Choc des cultures. Que rappellent toutes ces affiches? Il faut respecter les horaires, se concentrer sur son travail, mais la patronne préfère mettre l'accent sur le développement du pays.
Nous venons ici pour créer des emplois locaux. Nous voulons ainsi non seulement changer leur vie, mais aussi changer la vie de leurs enfants.
Résultat, l'entreprise prévoit d'investir 2 milliards d'euros en Éthiopie. Et elle n'est pas seule à vouloir profiter d'une main-d'œuvre aussi bon marché. Cette zone industrielle près d'Addis Abeba a été construite exprès pour des entreprises chinoises. 6 usines fonctionnent déjà. Dans 2 ans, il y en aura 80, avec 20 000 ouvriers. Au bar d'en face, chacun se félicite d'avoir tout simplement un travail. Même si souvent les conditions sont très dures, Adan a travaillé 2 ans dans une entreprise chinoise de ciment.
On travaillait sans protection. Pas de protection sur les chaussures, ni sur les habits. On ne portait pas de masque sur le visage. Et la nourriture n'était pas bonne, l'hygiène n'était pas bonne. L'eau n'était pas potable. Certains ont attrapé la typhoïde.
En bord de route pour rejoindre Addis Abeba, ces troupeaux rappellent que l'Éthiopie possède le plus grand cheptel d'Afrique. Encore un atout pour les entreprises qui transforment le cuir. Dans la capitale, la présence chinoise est bien visible, d'autant que le gouvernement éthiopien concède aux investisseurs 4 ans d'exonération de taxes.
The big things that come out of this report is the Ethiopian workers were making around $45 per month. That is 10% of what a Chinese worker would make for the same job. China is making out like a bandit on what could be almost considered slave labor. And the working conditions were so bad that there were reports of workers who caught typhoid. Then in an Associated Press report published in May of 2018, former workers say their wages were so low they struggled to pay bills. They had no protective gear. They were forced to work 12 hours a day and obviously participated in those military-style drills. A bit lower down, we see they used dangerous chemicals, machines that cut their hands. They had no idea about hand gloves. And if you refused to work without the protective gear, you would be told to leave the company and fired. Lower down in the article, you can see the industrial zones Helen was in charge of are favorable to Chinese investors, but not to local communities or the local private investors. Weijin workers make just $35 to $62 per month, and the basic living wage in Ethiopia is $109 per month. Remember, these factories were all under Helen's control, and she was the CEO of Overseas Investment. As a result, there was a worker strike. But according to the AP report published, the strike didn't seem to raise wages nor the working conditions. These reports were further confirmed when in July of 2017, a Chinese labor activist, part of the China Labor Watch, a New York-based NGO, found similar conditions back in the main Weijin factories in China. It was reported by The Guardian this activist was arrested for his investigations into the factories. And this was notable because Weijin was doing a run for Ivanka Trump's clothing line at the time. Helen has expanded since leaving Weijin. She is the founder of the Made in Africa initiative. She co-founded CNH Garments, which has factories all over Africa, Rwanda, Senegal, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Now, what does this have to do with the Binance charity? Well, because Helen Hai is the leader of it and director, and the Binance charity is targeting their charity efforts in the same places that Helen has made her factory operations, Africa, places like Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. So the Binance charity claims to support the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Among these are poverty reduction, decent work conditions, and economic growth, as well as reduced inequality among countries. From Helen's track record, these goals of the Binance charity need to be questioned, especially with how her own values of good do not appear to be reflected in the above. So we have Helen Hai leading the Binance charity for CZ and Binance, with the president of Malta as the chairman. But right after they announced listing fees would be going to this charity, Justin Sun, founder of Tron, donated $3 million to the Binance charity. And that is where we will leave this episode off at. Next time we will be investigating these funds and if they are actually fully going into the charity's wallets, as we have tracked the donations. we will investigate multiple deposits, not only from Tron, but also from listing fee deposits, and we will find out if the amounts deposited actually add up. Do you think they do? You will have to tune in next week to find out. Cheers, viewers. I'll see you next time.